So let's say you take a topic that's very divisive, like conspiracy theories. And typically, the moment the topic comes up, people have already made up their mind and instantly cleaved. Like, they don't need to hear anymore. They're like, this tinfoil hat wearing motherfucker is a danger to society. How do we shut them up and have them not kill everyone with the plague? Or someone just starts to hear about conspiracy and they're like, yeah, I probably will believe this. I'm probably interested in this. Whoever talks about this are probably my people, right? And what's interesting is there's like an intuitive resonance like that. And it doesn't mean every conspiracy theorist agrees with everything that any particular person says. But so as I overgeneralize to just kind of make a point, and then we can add the nuance back, you can see that that's a very strongly polarizing thing, where then there is basically no perspective seeking across that divide usually that happens. Well, if you ask in abstract, so asking in abstract is helpful because we'll remove all the emotional tension of this situation. So conspiracies have some people shared information with some other people to coordinate for some activity that they don't share widely with everyone for their own personal gain throughout history. Is that a thing that happens? Yeah, of course that's a fucking thing that happens. Happens all the time. It's all of what you can call like political strategy. And so then do some people get very good at intentionally lying and misinforming? You were a poker player, right? A bluff is
done that before.
Yeah. And so you were intentionally mastering the art of disinformation for a game theoretic advantage, right? And the soccer player does it when they fake to go this way and then they actually go this way. Or they're like, in any game theoretic scenario, truth about reality equals competitive advantage. So you want to throw the other guy off. So if I'm a politician or if I'm running a business and trying to corner the market or whatever it is, I'll try to both withhold my true information and create some false information so I can advance. So
depending on the goal of the defined goal, right? If your goal is your personal advance, then maybe yes. But if your goal is to actually make the society flourish, then
that's why I said in a competitive game theoretic scenario where we're not talking about a coordination game, right? But a zero-sum type game.
Yeah.
So then truth becomes one of the weapons. It becomes one of the things that we fight the battle with. So withholding information, trade secrets, patents, classified information, and then disinforming, right? Propaganda, whatever. Well, you don't have to study history very much to see that you can see the entire lens of the history of the world through that lens. And it's a very insightful lens. And Sun Tzu was talking thousands of years ago about how to conspire effectively, right? And how to break conspiracies effectively. And Machiavelli was talking about it. And so the idea that that's not a thing is just silly. That said, lots of the conspiracy theories that said such and such is going to happen by this date never fucking happen. And so they're like objectively, clearly wrong. And so to kind of generally bias towards or away from that as a whole class is silly. You can't think of it as a class in that way. But let's just say that we do. And we're looking at the people who do. So I've never actually seen an information ecology, a news ecology more fucked up than I'm seeing right now with regard to COVID, because you've got it's not even just the popular news, it's even science journals, right? It's the UK saying, oh, we're going to stay open and do herd immunity. And then a couple of days later, oh, fuck, actually everyone's going to die because the Imperial College just said this thing. And so we're actually going to lock down for 18 months. And then, oh, no, we overcorrected in that. And so the range even of within the scientific literature of ideas and guesses about it is orders of magnitude off. And partly that's because it's a novel virus. And partly it's because things like epidemiology are actually complex. And this one, where you have long, contagious, asymptomatic period is particularly complex to try to forecast. Like the unknown unknowns are quite high. So similarly, anyone who has a kind of sense in them of mistrust of the state and state type authorities, and they think that any state action that is going to decrease their freedom is probably some deep state conspiratorial cabal that is trying to remove everyone's freedoms and oppress them, they're going to just automatically tend to react to certain news in their news feed more than others, right? This is where the confirmation bias thing comes in. And since most people, when they read news, they aren't reading science journals, they're reading news that maybe discusses something in science, and they don't go check the science journal themselves, they decide at a feeling level, this feels true. They don't even realize they're doing it, right? Because they didn't go through and look at the science journal, look at all the journals on the topic, find the experts who disagree, find why they disagree, look at the methodology and see, is the conclusion epistemically grounded? There's like, see, I knew the thing wasn't real, or see, I knew it was going to kill everyone, where really it's just hitting a predisposition that's resonant, and then they're going with that resonance. But it goes in both ways, right? So there are the other side that just generally tends to think that there is this thing called legitimate authority and legitimate experts, and that science is real and science has the answers, and that there are these things called science deniers, and they might be anti-climate changers or anti-vaxxers or whatever, and they're all dangerous and they're all problems, and we just need to like trust the scientific authorities and they'll tell us what to do. And that's also kind of like an emotional disposition more than it is a very well analyzed position, right? And they're both silly. They both have a little bit of truth too, and they're both silly, right? And it's important to see the truth, because otherwise you won't understand a lot of why the world thinks what it is, and you won't be able to be effective if you don't understand why people think what they think. And you'll also be getting it wrong if you don't understand the partial truth. So if I'm to say, okay, there's a group of people for whom, if anything comes from a major authoritative scientific institution, they assume it's part of the Great Conspiracy. And it's the standard model bias and whatever. Well, that's just silly, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that comes out of major universities that empirically works. Like, we test it and it makes better computers. Like, it fucking works. There's no question. It's a real thing. And then on the other side, the idea that there's this perfect, beautiful thing called peer review in the halls of academia that just does the perfect epistemics, and there's no ego or bias, and the finances that influence the nature of what's being researched don't play a role at all. That's just silly, right? And there's so much stuff now where we have seen people that are actively falsifying and fucking up their research, or even where they're not doing that, but like somebody puts something that is gibberish on purpose into peer review, and it gets published in an article in a place like Nature, and people peer review stuff based on the politics of who they need to get on the good side of for their own career advancement. And then even things like, okay, well, even if something isn't wrong, the things that are getting funded are the things that somebody wants to fund because they see that there will be an ROI on that. And there might be other things that would be more true and more relevant that will never get funded because there's no ROI. So then we say the preponderance of data shows such and such, but it was the preponderance of data all in this one little area of the whole picture based on incentives. So it's misinforming, even if it's all true, right? So then we have to say, like, does the fact that science needs funded and is done by people with egos and with politics involved, does that fuck up the epistemics of it? Yeah, of course it does. And it doesn't completely fuck it up. So ultimately, for me, I actually go into the science article. I look at the methodology. I look at if the methodology makes sense. I try to look at all of the literature and try to do kind of structured literature review. Then I try to find experts in the field who disagree and see if I can find out why they disagree, take the perspectives, and I can start to make sense of it, right? So are the people who say just trust the institutions, are they right? No, the WHO got this wrong from the beginning, again and again. Like it's almost a perfect record of getting things wrong. And many of the main universities that were doing epidemiological models were like bad. They're pretty bad. And so we should just trust the authorities. It's just silly. That's just not paying attention. On the other hand, and, we can see the WHO and the Gates Foundation and places like that doing randomized control trials on antivirals for use in the intensive case, which is once people are in hospitals, when in the entire field of medicine, antivirals almost only work immediately after exposure, not once you already have a severe illness. And so it's like, that doesn't even, why would anyone even do that trial? That doesn't even make sense. I mean, yes, you might want to see if like by surprise it helps late stage people, because that'd be cool, but also include early stage, which is where there's really only any chance. But if you do late stage and then say it doesn't work and generalize it as if to early stage, maybe you're just really being kind of dull and not paying attention to the entire body of antiviral knowledge.
Or maybe
you want to show that Trump was an idiot and do an information warfare piece that attacks hydroxychloroquine, or maybe because you're a Democrat or a supporter or just hate him or whatever it is. Or maybe you have a drug that you really like and the generic drugs that nobody's going to make any money on, it would be better to show are ineffective. Now, are people that fucked up? Yeah. Like that kind of information warfare is a real thing. And so it's important to know that the information we're being exposed to has agendas attached to it. And the agendas are not always the ones they say they are. The agendas are usually complex. So now, then the other side that says the entire thing is nonsense, that this is basically a flu, nobody's really dying. That's also just gibberish. And all you have to do is call some ICU doctors in New York and ask about their experience, or in Italy, and you'll never fucking say that again, which I did, early on. I was talking to them and working with them.
How was that? How was that? What did they say?
They were describing seeing disease progression that was unlike anything that they had seen before. The whole ground glass opacities in the lung, the rate at which people would degrade and break down, the complete failure of ventilation to do what they would normally think it to do in pneumonias. They were very boggled by the pathology. It didn't follow anything that they could make sense of at all. And then they were also completely fucking devastated, just putting people on intubation and taking them off dead all day. And having to go in without PPE and without adequate PPE, and having to it's a trip, because if the doctors or nurses who decide to go work mostly would quarantine themselves at a hotel, and some were just staying in their car or whatever, because they don't want to go back by their family and possibly kill their family. But that also means that they know that they might be leaving their children parentless because they don't want to leave these people dying. So it's intense. And there's a massive disrespect to that whole thing when you just say the whole thing was a farce, because you didn't even do the research deep enough to try to figure it out. Now, that side, though, that says the whole thing is a farce because of just some control agenda. Are there control agendas? Yes, of course there are. And the thing isn't a farce. And it is being utilized opportunistically. The whole don't let a good crisis go to waste. Well, if I'm playing the market, when the market has more volatility, if I'm one of the better players that has more insight, I'm going to do a lot better than when the market doesn't have volatility. And so a few people have made a shit ton of money in the last couple of months when almost everybody lost a lot of money, like the movement of trillions of dollars that basically concentrated. And so if I'm a major financial player in the hedge fund world or whatever, and I have intelligence briefings, it tells me this thing has jumped out of Wuhan and it's going to fuck the world up and whatever. Could I, with all of my money and connections, try to talk to the CDC and the WHO and the president, whatever, and get them to do a better job of handling this? Well, I could. I probably would succeed at that, but I'm not going to, because that's not my job. And I'm not motivated to do that. And my fiduciary responsibility to shareholders anyways is to maximize profit. And I'm about to fucking short this market completely, sell the stocks at the top and then buy shit back up at the bottom for, a fraction of what it was worth a couple months ago and will be worth again very soon. Now, in the same way that market volatility creates the opportunity for more power grabs, it also creates the opportunity, increased volatility in the world creates an opportunity for more political power grabs. And so before this happened, China was trying to advance the Belt and Road Initiative, and Russia was trying to get Eastern Europe back into deeper alliance with it. And a couple different forces in the US were pretty focused on fighting each other for the US power grab. And so then when this situation comes, they just keep doing the thing they were doing, just using the increased volatility of trillions of dollars of stimulus money and who can get it and shit like that. But that also then ends up influencing media narratives and even what science is getting funded. And so then we look at things like contact tracing. Okay, well, we have to do diagnostics so that we can stop the spread of the disease. But then if someone tests positive, we want to know everyone that they've interacted with so that we can go test them as well. Because otherwise you'll have, a single person who's asymptomatic can reinfect the whole world. So we're going to empower some kind of phone-based app to do contact tracing. Should people be concerned about that from a civil liberties surveillance point of view? Absolutely. Like, that's a really terrible thing that shouldn't happen in that way. And it's a really valuable thing. And these are both true, right? Like, I think we need contact tracing. And I don't want high-tech surveillance that will never be removed afterwards. Because if you look, I'll speak to the US here because I know it better. When an emergency happens, we'll usually put in a provisional emergency act to deal a wartime type act. But we don't repeal it after the fucking thing's over, hardly ever, because once power players have got more power, they don't tend to give it back, right? They don't have to. And everybody else customizes and moves on, and Kardashians or whatever. And so the FISA Act or the Patriot Act or the Homeland Security Act or those don't roll away. Okay, so after 9/11 and we realized they didn't really have weapons of mass destruction, do we roll those acts back? No. And so is that this type of situation again, but where we even start getting into wanting to breach people's biomedical security and be able to determine whether they can travel or not based on whether they have antibodies or vaccinated, or I think that's really dangerous. And I think we need to do contact tracing. Now, I think we can do low-tech contact tracing, just like we did with epidemics throughout all of history, where you just ask people, who did you come in contact with? And I think there are certain forms of contact tracing technologically that are much safer. And I think there are ways to put forced expiries in them, right? But this is where it's like, if you hear, let's say you're kind of left-oriented and you hear the guys who are saying this is just a big hoax and they just want to surveil us, they're partly right. Now, what they're saying as is actually very dangerous and pernicious and problematic, but they're also kind of partly right, which is, are there agendas that are seeking to advance the asymmetric power they already have in this situation, and we should watch out for it? Yes, of course. And typically, when you see that power follows a power law distribution, right? You'll have a few people who have most of the power and then progressively less. The people who got here didn't get it by sharing their power. Like, that's not how that happened. They got it by winning at game theory again and again and again and again and getting good at doing that thing, right? So typically those who have more power, asymmetric power in a power law distribution, use their asymmetric power to protect and get more asymmetry of power. Like, that's the generator function. And they're fighting against other people who are also trying to do it. So, is it going to be Zuckerberg or is it going to be Xi Jinping who gets the Metcalfe law, one ring to rule them all, that creates the digital currency that is the new reserve currency for the world? So then you can even have the plausible deniability of saying, well, I have to do this, otherwise the other guy is going to do the thing, right? Now, that still looks like those with the most power using that radical asymmetric power to concentrate more power. Does that tend to be in the good of everyone? No. Will we give one example where it seems to be in the good of everyone as the source of selling point, the sugar that makes the medicine go down? Sure. So this is when we talk about perspective seeking and the faulty confidence. I only see faulty confidence in kind of mainstream narratives, because mostly they live at too low a complexity level to make adequate sense of reality.
But I mean, with increased understanding of complexity, automatically I feel your level of confidence goes down, because the moment you start reaching a level of complexity of understanding how many potential factors go into it, you understand how many factors you don't even have a proper clue about.
Yes. Now you start to become, so there was a mayor of a California city who contacted me today, and it was so refreshing. It was one of the few politicians that didn't elicit upset emotions in me. I said that like a politician. So she was lovely, and she said, like, I don't even know what I don't know about this topic. I don't even know what questions to ask. I don't know how to think about it. I don't want to waste your time, but like, I want to make sense of it. And I'm like, I'm so glad that you're the mayor, because someone who seems earnestly like they really care and really wants to do the right thing and knows that they don't know and is seeking to find the right source of input can be trusted with leadership.